Good morning, everyone. This is Adam Bianchi. I'm Brand Director with the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs, or ACMA. I'd like to first thank everyone for being with us today for this important discussion of COVID-19, how it impacts the medical affairs community, and what the ACMA is doing in response to the crisis. For those of you who aren't as familiar with our organization, the ACMA serves the life science industry by providing the industry standard and benchmark of excellence for medical affairs professionals. We do this through our Board Certified Medical Affairs Specialist Program, or BCMAS. We've got several great speakers to talk with us today. We're going to start off with Dr. William Soliman. He'll provide opening remarks and discuss the ACMA's plan of action in response to the COVID crisis. And we have Dr. Sam Girgis, who will be discussing COVID-19 on the front line from a physician's perspective. Dr. Girgis is an attending physician at Jersey Shore University Medical Center and is working directly with COVID patients every day. Dr. Jill Massey will discuss leading medical affairs in the COVID-19 era. Jill is Senior Vice President of Medical Affairs at Melinta Therapeutics, and she brings 27 years of leadership to our discussion today. And Dr. Bob Fell is a senior MSL with 20 years of medical experience. He will share an MSL's perspective on field medical affairs during COVID-19. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. William Soliman, the Chairman and CEO of the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs. Dr. Soliman has more than 15 years of experience in the pharma industry, and he is a widely recognized pharma futurist, having been featured on Fox Business News, ABC, Forbes, and other major media outlets as an expert on the latest trends in pharma. Dr. Soliman earned a PhD from Columbia University and a bachelor's from New York University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. William Soliman.
Thanks very much, Adam. First, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I have to say the response to the webinar has really been overwhelming. We've had over 400 plus registrants that have actually registered today for the webinar from around the world. So I think it speaks to the fact that COVID-19 really is a pandemic that affects everyone on so many levels. As many of you know who are familiar with the ACMA, our mission has always been focused on raising the bar in the healthcare ecosystem, and we do this by partnering with the pharma biotech industry to provide benchmarking, like Adam said, through training and certification for medical affairs and MSLs globally. And this is really no different, right? We've undertaken several initiatives in this situation to help in any way we can with the community for those that have been impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. I also want to thank our colleagues over across the pond in Europe and the UK, the European Medical Group, Journal Gold, Isabel O'Brien and her team for participating and sharing this webinar as well as reporting on it. Also want to thank Lisa Henderson and her team at the Pharmaceutical Executive as well for their coverage of the webinar. So again, I want to thank everybody for joining. I'm just going to spend a very short period of time, a few minutes, kind of going through some of the different initiatives that we've undertaken to kind of address COVID-19. We've actually convened a COVID-19 Medical Affairs Task Force, and really the purpose is to better understand the challenges that COVID is creating for MSL medical affairs professionals in the pharma industry as a whole. We're collecting best practices. So if you have ideas, please feel free to reach out to us to help all of us kind of move into this new normal of life with the quarantine, the travel bans, and really a stressed healthcare system. I want to thank the members of the task force for taking on this new project, including Dr. Jill Massey, who's going to be with us later today speaking. We've also added a COVID-19 resources page, which I think is great. It's going to aggregate all the latest information from CDC, the World Health Organization, the FDA regarding COVID. So I think it's going to be really a valuable resource and really authoritative resource of the current information that's out there being done to fight the virus and provide treatment for patients. We've also started an ongoing discussion forum with some of the new challenges for our shifted work environment. So let us know what's working for you, what's frustrating you, and what you're really struggling to accomplish during this unique time in our history. We've also implemented a financial plan for many individuals who have been affected by COVID and who are still interested in self-development and trying to access ACMA programs like the Board Certification Program in Medical Affairs. our goal is to put the training tools like BCMAS into the hands of professionals who are trying to make the most of this time that they have at home. So please reach out to us. We'll work with you on any payment plans so that payment is not an issue and finances aren't an issue. Tour your professional development. We've already heard from a lot of people around the globe. So, this is something that we love to do to be able to help. So anything we can do, please feel free to reach out to us at info@medicalaffairsspecialist.org. Again, that's info@medicalaffairsspecialist.org. And by the way, all of these links and emails and information that we're sharing today will be provided online as well. You'll have access to the webinar recording as well as the slides. So feel free to reach out to us with any questions. One of the things that we're doing that I think is absolutely excellent is providing a free COVID-19 course. So we're going to be providing, as part of our resources, a free course that's going to be available to everyone that's going to cover the latest scientific and medical treatment for COVID-19. And we hope that it's going to be valuable to the community and really better understanding what we're facing in this pandemic. And again, that's be available to everyone. And now you can find, again, on medicalaffairsspecialist.org. We'll find a link there right on the landing page. We've also launched many partnerships with some of the top 20 pharma companies around the world who work with us on an institutional, organizational basis. Many of the companies are looking to use this time to accredit and certify their MSL teams and medical affairs professionals. And what we're going to actually be doing is we're going to be donating a portion of the proceeds to help hospitals who are serving as critical care centers in the hotspots around the world of the COVID infection. So if you are a leader and you want to use this time for self-development for your team, let us know. We'd be more than happy to work with you and again donate a portion of those proceeds to the healthcare system to help relieve some of that stress. And then finally, we've launched a food and supply drive to support the wider community. And this is going to be facilitated by GoFundMe. Many people, as you guys probably know, are finding themselves in crisis, whether it's work-related issues, transportation has become more uncertain. I just heard a story the other day of a father who was really distraught because he couldn't provide for his family over the next week. And so many of us who are less fortunate can really use that help. So Christine Magala, who many of you I know come into contact with, she's the Director of Education and Training. She'll be facilitating and leading that initiative. And again, you can reach out to her if you're interested in participating and supporting this food bank. And I think, as you can see, I think it's more important than ever during this pandemic to come together as a community and support our colleagues, whether it's the physicians on the front line, like we'll be hearing in a few minutes from Dr. Girgis, or others in the industry who work with many of the academic centers of excellence in medical affairs within the larger healthcare ecosystem. So with that, I'm looking forward now to hearing from some of our speakers as they share their insights and thoughts about how we can move forward in this kind of new normal of the COVID era. And with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker for today, Dr. Sam Girgis, who is Assistant Medical Director at the Division of Hospital Medicine, Jersey Shore University Medical Center. He's also the Assistant Professor of Medicine at Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine. Dr. Girgis graduated with honors from Cornell University. While there, he performed basic scientific research, which resulted in several first author publications in world-renowned biomedical journals. He completed an internal medicine residency at Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital, and now has over 18 years of clinical experience. He's worked at Mount Sinai in New York City, Woodhull Hospital, Coney Island, and St. Francis as well. I think Dr. Girgis is going to bring a really interesting perspective. He's on the front line treating many of these COVID-19 patients. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Sam Girgis.
All right, thanks, Dr. Soliman. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak today. Yeah, so I just, I wanted to share some of my experiences treating COVID patients. I just wanted to start with my background. Basically, I have about 18 years of clinical experience in the practice of medicine. I've worked in both New York City and New Jersey, and most of the time it's been as a hospitalist practicing hospital medicine. And I can tell you that the experience has been very unique. It's been a very stressful and anxiety-provoking situation for everyone in the healthcare industry, especially on the front lines with doctors and nurses. I worked in New York City during the H1N1, influenza epidemic, as well as when we had the scares for Ebola as well as SARS. None of them really came to the U.S. Like COVID has done, and my feeling is that it's really just beginning at this point. I think New York City and New Jersey has been probably the most hard hit. In New York City, it's probably become it's become the epicenter of the pandemic in the United States, and my feeling is that it'll probably continue to spread throughout the country as well. So the experience has been really trying at times. The patients that we have in the hospital, some of them are improved and are discharged home, but others clinically deteriorate rapidly, with most of the time respiratory failure and require supplemental oxygen, BiPAP, and even intubation and mechanical ventilation. And so that's the unique thing about the COVID disease, is that it has a very large spectrum of presentation and severity. It can range from asymptomatic carriers to a mild flu-like illness to respiratory failure and even multi-organ failure requiring critical care. So that's the initial experience that I've had. So I've received a lot of questions on Twitter, so I'm going to try to answer some of those during this webinar. Do you have specific questions for me, Dr. Soliman?
Yeah, sure. Talk to us a little bit about maybe some of the available treatments as of today. We get a lot of questions as well. We had via email prior to the webinar about some of the treatments and about some of the data that's out there. There's been some conflicting data, I think, with some of the treatments and some confusion. So I think that can really help to clarify it for some of the attendees today.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. So I just want to start out by saying that, initially, the thought was, my personal feeling was that this wasn't going to be a severe event in the United States. We've had previous episodes with SARS, MERS, even Ebola, and they never became a big problem in the United States. And my personal feeling was that the condition that we're in currently wouldn't happen. And a lot of people were saying this was similar to influenza, and I can tell you that it's not influenza. It's much, much different, and it's significantly more severe. As for the treatments, there are currently no FDA-approved treatments for COVID-19. We do have some studies that have come out of China, and there is one French study that has looked into using hydroxychloroquine as well as azithromycin, and there's anecdotal evidence to suggest that this treatment is beneficial. In my experience, I am seeing a benefit in my COVID-19 patients, and we have discharged many patients that we treated for COVID-19 with these medications, and then we were able to stabilize them and get them back home. The clinical evidence for the use of these medications still needs to be confirmed with large-scale clinical trials and be FDA approved, but the initial studies are promising. The French study looked at 36 patients, and they were treated for a 5 or 6 day period with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, and they looked at nasal swabs for RNA from the virus, and they show that the RNA, a viral RNA, dropped significantly after the treatment, and so that suggests that it's effective in bringing down viral load. But like I said before, this treatment is not FDA approved. And Dr. Anthony Fauci has commented about this as well. There's some encouraging anecdotal experience with it, but because there's no other current treatment for this condition, we are using it in the hospital at this time. Some of the other treatments that are currently being used, there's a Gilead drug by the name of remdesivir that we're using in the intensive care unit. And this medication is an antiviral medication. It's a nucleoside analog that was initially developed by Gilead for use in Ebola as well as Marburg viral illnesses, and it's currently being used for COVID-19. And we've also seen some benefit with this medication as well. Some other medications include there's an IL-6 blocker called tocilizumab that we're also using in the ICU, and we've seen some good results with that as well. But like I said before, all these medications are really experimental at this point and need FDA approval. They're being used off-label for the treatment of COVID-19, and more investigation is really needed at this point. There's also been some talk of using hydroxychloroquine for prophylaxis. I'm not currently using it for prophylaxis. And that also needs to be confirmed as beneficial as well. In New York, they're initiating studies for using convalescent serum and using antibodies from patients that are recovered. That's another possible treatment option. And there's pharmaceutical companies such as Moderna that are trying to develop vaccines for this condition as well. But those aren't going to be available, from my feeling, is for about 12 to 18 months from now.
Thank you, Dr. Girgis. We've actually had tons of questions come in, and I'm going to try to see if we can at least address some of them. What dosing are you currently using when you do use hydroxychloroquine? What's the recommended dosing, I guess, for treatment? Not prophylaxis, but just for treatment in general.
So I wouldn't say that anything is recommended at this point. This is all basically off-label usage, and it's being, it's really done by the studies that have come out of China, as well as the French study that was done. And so the current regimen that we use is hydroxychloroquine. We use 400 milligrams twice a day on day one, and then 200 milligrams twice a day for 4 days after that.
Okay. Do we know whether or not, one of the questions that came in was about the effects of treatment with high doses of vitamin C. Do we know much about that, or are there any reports or any data around that?
There's in the intensive care setting, our intensivists are using high dose vitamin C, and it's given as an IV infusion. It's a very high dose concentration for 6 hours, then off for 6 hours, then on for another 6 hours. On the medical floors, we are not using the high dose regimen. We're using a lower dose regimen. This treatment, also needs to be confirmed with clinical trials, but it is being used.
Okay. One of the things is, as we all know, we've been told that if you come into contact with a patient who's tested positive for the coronavirus, to quarantine for 14 days. Will you be able to let us know that, let's say, you do end up contracting COVID, after what point does the patient stop being contagious? So let's say they've contracted the disease, now they've recovered, when do they stop being contagious? I think a lot of people, have that question. It's on their mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. So the patients that are exposed to COVID, to the COVID virus, and eventually develop the illness, usually have about a 2 to 7 day period where they initially develop the symptoms of the disease, and then go on to progress to the illness. If you come into contact with a patient that's ill with this condition, what we usually do is we put we're put into quarantine for a 14-day period. And so that 14-day period is really comes from experiences from China and other countries that have had experience with this disease before us. And if you remain asymptomatic without a fever after that 14-day period, then you most likely will not contract the illness.
Okay. And one final question, and there's been a lot of great questions which we'll try to answer, later after the webinar. We'll try to definitely get those answered for our participants. But just being weary of time, one question that came up that I think, again, is on a lot of people's minds is about the use of NSAIDs like ibuprofen in patients that have coronavirus, and kind of what we know about NSAIDs, ACE inhibitors, the renin-angiotensin system. Does this worsen clinical disease and prognosis in patients with coronavirus? Can maybe you comment about that?
Yeah, sure. So we're currently using acetaminophen for fevers for these patients. We're trying to avoid ibuprofen because there's some experience and some data to suggest that ibuprofen use can worsen the condition. In addition, the virus uses the ACE2 receptor to enter the cell, and any patients that are on ACE inhibitors or ARBs have upregulation of this receptor. And the theory is that with upregulation of the receptor, then the condition could potentially be worsened by that. There's other thoughts that using losartan, which is an ARB, to potentially block the ACE2 receptor during the infectious period could potentially be therapeutic. There's one study out of Iran that was suggesting that, but all this needs to be confirmed. What we are doing with our patients that are on ACE inhibitors is that we are continuing them if they're being treated for COVID, unless they become severe or have kidney issues such as acute kidney injury.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, with that, I want to thank you, Dr. Girgis. I know that you're really busy at this time, and obviously it's a stressful time for you and other healthcare providers. So I think, I speak on behalf of everyone on the call and in the community, thanking you for everything that you're doing and really putting your own lives on the line. So thank you, for everything that you guys are doing for the community at large and the patients. I can imagine it's not easy. So thanks once again. And again, this webinar will be made available afterwards. You'll be able to access it and access the slides as well. Thank you, Dr. Girgis. All
right, thank you for having me.
Very good. So next we have, really excited to introduce Dr. Jill Massey. As Adam mentioned earlier on, Dr. Jill Massey has over 27 years of experience in the industry within medical affairs and the commercialization and lifecycle management areas within pharma. And she's done this across multiple therapeutic areas at all different kinds of companies, big pharma, small. Currently, she's the Senior Vice President of Medical Affairs at Melinta Therapeutics. Jill earned her Doctor of Pharmacy degree from the University of Nebraska Medical Center and her MBA from Drexel. She completed her residency at Mercer University School of Pharmacy and Emory University in Atlanta. And Jill is also board certified in medical affairs. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Massey. Jill?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. It's interesting to hear more from the front lines that we're already hearing on all of the news stations and more detail. I think the two topics that I want to briefly cover with everybody from a perspective of industry is, number one, leading remotely. If you want to progress to the next slide, that would be great. And I think, no, one back. So, yep, there you go. So Dr. Soliman asked me to cover specifically what does it mean to lead in this medical affairs in this era of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think we have all come to the realization, maybe quicker than we were prepared to, that that means basically leading remotely. And a couple of principles, if you want to jump to the next slide, that are important just to remind people of is that we're using all the communication tactics that we have used in the past. That hasn't changed, but we're now doing it through a variety of different forms of media. There was a survey done by our colleagues at Best Practices that talked about the companies switching to or accelerating their digital or technological tools. 66% of them, I think it quoted, were going to be accelerating their efforts in their tools and technology. And up to 40% said that even after the pandemic, they plan to incorporate these digital engagement tools permanently. So it's important for you as leaders to become very familiar with your digital tools, your digital means, your technology infrastructure in order to support your continuous communication, just like you were doing before, but using different tools. I think the one question that always comes up is trust. How do we build trust with customers or with our internal colleagues or whatever stakeholder it is that we're talking about when it is at a distance? And I think it's important to acknowledge that what we're trying to do has not changed. How we're trying to do it has changed. And there's, when you talk about the components of trust, the former CEO of the medicines company, Clive Meanwell, always used to talk about the components of trust being competence, consistency, customer experience, and quality. And something here that we have to make sure is that our content doesn't breach any of those components of trust, certainly, but that our tools and technology are also delivering on those components of trust, such as customer experience. We want to make sure as medical affairs that we're still conveying our evidence-based medicine, translating that for customers as relevant, making sure that we are addressing their unmet needs, even if those unmet needs in today's world mean leave me alone right now because I'm managing a crisis in my hospital and I can't get to you. Think of a way that you might be able to get to them on their downtime if they should have the luxury of such. Monitoring and coaching is obviously more difficult when you're talking about doing this remotely. How do you know that your employees, when they need help, when they are needing your coaching, how do you monitor and measure what they're doing? Again, from the same report, which I'll give you the reference to at the end of a couple of minutes here, is talked about that 66% of the companies they surveyed with today's ongoing pandemic are considering changing their metrics. There's not a lot of clarity on what those changes will be and how companies will look at their remote-based staff, which is 100% of their staff now, going forward, but they are indicating that most of them are going to be reconsidering some of their goals and outcomes that they measure today in light of the pandemic. The second and more important issue that I wanted to address, if you want to jump to the next slide, is really leadership in crisis. That's what we're dealing with here. So regardless of the mechanisms of how we're going to do that or the tactics of how we're going to do that for all of our stakeholders, not just our employees, it's the same principles that you would employ during any other crisis that you're facing in your company or in the environments with which you work. If you want to go to the next slide, the first one is to really well define what the crisis is. Is it an emerging crisis? Is it an unfolding crisis? Is it an exploding crisis? And just because it's one or the other doesn't mean it can't transform into one or the other. So as this pandemic started, I think we were all watching from afar maybe a month ago as it affected other countries and viewed it as an unfolding crisis. But now that it's here in the U.S., for our U.S. colleagues anyway, it's certainly an exploding crisis. Once you categorize that, I implore you to go to the business continuity plan that hopefully most of you have in place, and the teams or task forces, as I know as Dr. Soliman referenced, we have a task force for Acma now, and activate those teams. now is the time if you haven't already done it. Again, from the survey data, over 80% of the companies surveyed have activated their task force or their business continuity plans and teams, and 87% of those include medical affairs participants, especially given the nature of this particular crisis. It's important to prioritize needs based on what your stakeholders, which again are broad-based, not just employees, but also your external stakeholders. I happen to work for Melinta Therapeutics, which is a commercial stage antibiotics biopharmaceutical company with 4 marketed antibiotics for infections that are caused by the critical and urgent priority pathogens according to the World Health Organization and CDC. While they're not antivirals, we want to make sure that our supply chain of these important antibiotics are still available for the patients who need access to them and our healthcare provider stakeholders that are trying to get access to them. So it's really important that, number one, we maintain our business continuity to provide the supply chain to the, as I mentioned, the patients and healthcare providers that are trying to get access to them. It's also important that you look at your employees. I remember back when I used to work for J&J in 2011, we had a shortage of Doxil, which is a chemotherapeutic agent, and used to treat stage 4 multiple myeloma, ovarian cancer, and other types of cancers. And I had responsibility for the customer call center at the time. And the toll that the nurses, this customer call center was staffed primarily by nurses, the toll taken on those healthcare providers by the patients and caregivers that they were having to tell they would have to sign up for a registry, and that their courses of therapy for very severe disease states, obviously, were going to be interrupted as a result of the shortage was huge. So you can't underestimate the toll that it's taking on your own employees, whatever crisis they're dealing with externally, and make sure that you have HR, whatever your resources are available for them to continue to do their job. So again, they can continue to serve the patients and healthcare providers who need their services. The other thing that is important in a crisis for consideration by leaders is to make sure your decisions are based on evidence and the core values that you've indicated are important for your company, and not reactionary. In times of crisis, everybody seems to have a solution in the moment, and everybody wants to do something quickly to resolve the situation. It's important to make sure that your team, everybody is in their roles and performing their function, and importantly for your business continuity, and presenting evidence as you learn it, as things will be changing as the crisis unfolds, and you're making decisions based on that. And communication and managing expectations. Recently, on December 27th of last year, Melinta Therapeutics, as one of the potential casualties of the antibiotics industry, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. While we were managing the mechanics of the bankruptcy, for which we were headed toward a bidding process and will emerge from that next month, very thankfully, we were also trying to manage the expectations again of our customers and the patients who needed access to our antibiotics. If you're not in front of the communication in this day and age where digital communication, it seems like people get information before the companies release it, you can find yourself again flat-footed. And there was a lot of misinformation going around about what bankruptcy meant, the definition of bankruptcy, that Melinta was exiting the space, that our supply chains were impacted, none of which were true. So I can't emphasize that word communication internally and externally enough so that you can manage expectations. And if there is an impact on supply chain or availability of your product, you certainly would let your customers know that. In our case, there wasn't, thankfully, and it was just something that we had to keep front of mind always. The last couple of things are all about the changing environment in any crisis. Again, whether it's an exploding crisis or unfolding crisis, the dynamics and the information coming in are going to change over time, most assuredly. And so it's important because your employees, your teams are looking to you for leadership, control, composure, but also flexibility to be able to manage what your actions are as information continues to unfold. And the last thing, it shouldn't be the last thing, but it's the old adage of put your mask on first before you take care of others that the airplane industry used to use, now kind of has a different meaning. But it's important that you're doing what you need to do for yourself as a leader so you can be available to take care of your teams and all of your stakeholders, whether that's taking it out on the treadmill, the yoga mat, it's some meditation, whatever it is. It's important that, again, as people are looking to you for leadership, you are providing yourself enough self-care that you can make yourself available for that. The very last slide is just a snippet of a summary of this data in this report that I asked best practices if you could all access, and you can for free. You just have to go to the best practices website, or Richard Young will obviously be able to help all of you. But they surveyed 35 biopharmaceutical companies on what they're doing in this time of the global COVID-19 pandemic. This is just a picture of their summary slide touching on some of the key topics that I reviewed with you. And they have much more detail in the report. If you want access to this report, I know we'll make that available through Acma as well. But as you can see, most companies have already triggered their task force, their business continuity plans, etc. Most are switching. I think their quote in there was over 80% of physicians have restricted access for your remote field teams, which I know you're going to hear about next. About half of those have zero access available because they're either addressing the concerns that are in front of them, as you heard with our first presenter, or they're trying to figure out ways to prevent their patients from utilizing healthcare resources in the hospital, keep them out of the hospital, the ones not affected by COVID-19. And the other half of that 80% are really restricted access, so critical needs or essential needs only. Again, most of the companies are changing their performance metrics based on the way that they're changing that they do business, and we'll look forward to hearing more about that. And most of them expect at least some of these changes to be permanent as we go forward. So about a month ago, I spoke at a digital medical affairs conference where we were trying to figure out how to use digital tools to do the job that we're currently doing. I think this pandemic for us is now going to force us to think about doing a different job, really, in order to support as it affects our clinical trials enrollments, as it affects maybe our FDA pending approvals or product launches. It certainly has already greatly impacted our ability to present our data at scientific congresses as more and more are getting canceled, and certainly affects our day-to-day interactions either with each other or with our customer healthcare providers who need our information. So I think we're now converting to that digital transformation that we were talking about, of not just doing the same job differently, but doing a different job. So it holds a lot of opportunity for you as leaders. And thank you again, Dr. Soliman, for the opportunity to present this today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Massey. That was excellent. I think you hit on a lot of really important points that many of the leaders on the call who work in the industry have been thinking about. And one of the questions that came through that I'd be interested to hear your perspective on was around this issue of real-world evidence. And the FDA issued guidance for the industry on what to do regarding clinical trials during the COVID-19 era. You know, what's your take on, I guess, regulatory flexibility now to help facilitate approval in the absence of being able to do more rigorous clinical trials because of obviously a lot of the travel bans and a lot of the issues. You know, kind of what's your take on that? What have you heard about that in terms of companies that are in that process of trying to either expand their indication in their label or trying to get new indications?
I think for the FDA, for products or diagnostic devices that are related to the COVID-19 pandemic, they are expediting reviews. They are looking at different criteria for approval in order to accomplish just that. I think for products that have nothing to do with COVID-19, but were pending approval, I think the FDA has communicated some changing priorities in terms of AdComs or timing or designated PDUFA dates. And so we'll see. I think that's still unfolding as to what the results of that will be. Even inspections, site inspections, I know they suspended outside of the U.S. and some are feeling the impact of delays or reprioritization in the U.S. I do think that this is a good thing for real world evidence. As you heard the first presenter talk about, we're learning as we go. We're testing almost anything and everything, and definitely still holding to the scientific evidence-based, efficacy and safety mantras, but certainly looking at speed enrollment for products and devices related to COVID-19. Just as a side note, the FDA did launch a website that it's called CureID, C-U-R-E-I-D, and this was launched actually before this pandemic in order to collect real-world evidence on antibiotics, again, to sort of facilitate sharing of real-world evidence in the antibiotics industry as it was flagging along. And now what you see on that website is a lot of COVID-19 drug trials, and they are results, brief reports, as well as potentially trials to enroll patients in. So I refer you to that as a good place for educating yourself on the most recent uses, if you haven't already been there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Massey. It's actually interesting. I've had a few correspondences with the FDA in the last week or so, and they were telling me, that right now, obviously, mission critical is this issue related to COVID. This is all they're focused on. So I think, things are going to shuffle around for some time until they can kind of figure things out. But thank you so much. That was really great. I want to introduce our last speaker, and really excited to have him with us today. He's a great presenter. I think you're going to enjoy listening to him. Dr. Bob Fell, who is with Sanofi in the diabetes division. He is their executive medical science liaison. He's been there for over 19 years now. Dr. Fell is trained at the University of Delaware, University of Colorado at Boulder, and the State University of New York at Buffalo. His past experience includes working at DuPont, CVS, Roswell Cancer Hospital, and Micromedics Thompson Healthcare. His core responsibilities now at Sanofi include key thought leader management, clinical trial support, and then really, working with investigators and working with many of the key opinion leaders or external experts, a lot of the academic centers of excellence around the country. Last fall, Bob became a board certified medical affairs specialist through the ACMA, and I've heard Bob speak many times. He's very passionate about field medical. So again, I think you'll enjoy his talk. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fell today.
Thank you, Dr. Soliman. Can you hear me good?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. I really appreciate the invitation to be on this webcast. And I also think that a number of things that Dr. Girgis and Dr. Massey said today, I'm going to highlight. I think there's some continuity of what I was thinking and what their experience has been on the front line and what Dr. Massey's experience has been now. I think, Jill, what you said actually really resonates with one of my main messages, so we'll hear that in a second. I think what I'm thinking about this now is this, and Dr. Soliman gave me the task to see what are how is this impacting the MSL team? How is this impacting field medical? That's a very customer-facing job. And really, things have changed quite a bit. And I just want to term that this show must go on. Obviously, what we're seeing here, if you can see the slide, is we have in our face the current issue and crisis. So I look at this problem, but I also want to look at solutions, and I'll talk about a couple of those and what those benefits are. Now, I work for a great company. I work for a great team. For Sanofi, our team is West half, best half. But what I'm going to present to you and talk to you about are my personal views. This should not be attributed to Sanofi. So what I'm going to talk to you all about is sort of my thoughts on the current condition. Next slide. I think as an MSL, I think we probably find ourselves swimming in clutter, in discord, in difficulty. And I have this quote by Albert Einstein. It's on my desk since I think I started many years ago. That's 19 years ago. But I really like it because, you know, out of clutter, we find simplicity. Out of discord, we find harmony. But really, it's that third sentence that's really affecting us all, and that is in the middle of difficulty, can we find opportunity here? So that quote really resonates with me. I think as a field medical person, I've been doing this for many years, and I think a number of you that are on right now actually have more experience than I do, but I feel like that should resonate with us. But I really like this recent quote by Rahm Emanuel. This was 2 days ago, in that he's on multiple news channels, and you know he was the mayor from Chicago for about 8 years. But this 2 days ago, he said that we should never let a serious crisis go to waste. And what he means by that is looking at the opportunities and how do we redo what we're doing? How do we live our lives differently? And how do we prevent, in this case, an economic depression from happening again, because another pandemic will occur. But this actually quote was from 2000, and I want to say 8, when he was referencing the energy crisis in the 70s. So we are in a very serious crisis, but this is not to take it lightly. It's to really think about how can we learn from this and how can we take advantage of our current situation. And I'm talking about from field medical, how can we use this? How can we use this to our advantage? And that's what I want to do, is talk about how do we leverage our current situation. Next slide, please. Well, you've already heard, we just heard from Dr. Massey that we're surviving disruption. And it just feels like we are pushing against these falling dominoes. And I'm referencing field medical, in which, you know, overnight, essentially, things have changed. I mean, this morning at 6 a.m., we got a reverse 911 call and I'm talking to you right now from Colorado. You know, the stay-at-home legislation essentially is just now being enforced across the entire state till, depending on what county, April 11th or April 17th. This really changes how we're doing things. And as an MSL, and Dr. Massey, you pointed this out, certainly things have happened with our clinical trials. You know, things are slowing down. Things are being expedited depending on what the application is. And I think, you know, we work with investigators, and we have a couple of trials here they're working on. It's got to be extremely frustrating to them, but I think they also understand. The recent FDA guidance with COVID in the background talks about some of these delays and what these expectations are. And we're also seeing almost daily the National Conference of State Legislature. It's a website that you can see by state the almost daily or weekly changes in legislation on around healthcare and how are we going to change reimbursement models. I think, as you heard from our first speaker, I think Dr. Girgis said something really insightful. He said it's a very stressful and anxiety-provoking situation, and we have to keep that in mind when sort of like our headquarters are in our home office and then it's travel. And our frontline physicians and also our day-to-day physicians are finding this, I think, stressful and anxiety provoking. So we're trying to find new ways to reach our customers. But I want to point out what Dr. Massey said was really insightful, and that is try to be in the shoes of your customer and think about what they need right now. And it may not be a presentation right now. Next slide. Boy, wouldn't it have been nice? Wouldn't it have been nice, Dr. Soliman, to back in January 1st, right after the holidays, to buy a bunch of Zoom stock? Because it's doubled. It's doubled. It's amazing, right? I mean, isn't that amazing? So they're hitting some volatility now. But, you know, I'm kind of making light of this, but you may not see it on the slide, but on the far right, this is Zoom. So Zoom is one of, I'm counting like 11 different platforms that has to do with video communications, audio conferencing, different ways to collaborate. But the founder started this company in 2011. So essentially, it took 9 years and a crisis for this company to incredibly shine and be leveraged in so many different venues right now. And so there's a lot of opportunities here. You know, at our company, we use Zoom. We've gone through so many different types of video conferencing platforms. This works for us, but I know other people like other systems. But this is what we're leveraging. And I think even within my own team, some of my teammates are leveraging it better than others. I still have some things to learn here, but I'm starting to leverage Zoom too. One of the things I'm doing later today, telemedicine has gone from sometimes single digits, but lower double digits to now where it's in 90% in some of these places. And I'm actually helping a provider later today just practice through Zoom. They're starting to do telemedicine now. This particular person I'm thinking of is starting today, day one, to do all telemedicine, where they have not done it before. But an interesting lesson here with Zoom, and now they are filling a really important gap. Next slide. The other thing I want to talk about, and Dr. Soliman, I'm going to send this to you. This was a publication that was circulated from our upper leadership team, sent to us by Accenture. What If is a company that's based out of the UK. They have offices that are in Manhattan. A great creative digital company, but this short, essentially, paper talks about different ways that we can virtually engage within our own teams and with also other stakeholders. It's a phenomenal paper, but there's some really important virtual engagement tips. And one of the things I want to talk about, and I think I encourage all of you to look for this type of information, because I think we're going to have more practice time. I think we're going to be, I wouldn't say self-isolated. We're trying to prevent that. But I think this paper is just a great refresher. It also provides some really, really good tips on how to better engage virtually. And Dr. Soliman, I'm going to send this to you. I did reach out to Accenture because I want to try to find where the link is. It's not copyrighted. I think they're in a sharing mode right now because they really want to help many other individuals leverage this platform. Next
sure,
slide.
that'd be great.
Yeah, I will do that, definitely. Well, the next slide here is, this is the gift of time. I think you also mentioned it. It's in a couple of your slides. This is a really good time to focus on learning and growth. There's a couple of traps I think we can get into here. It's easy to get antsy. If we're not meeting numbers, Dr. Massey, I think it was really appropriate for you to say that we need to reconsider what these numbers are. Because I think some folks might get really antsy about this because we're not doing the normal job. We got to do our job differently now. And I think the gift of time now is one, I think it's a great time for board certification or other types of certification. You already mentioned this. Podcasts, I think IDP, which is development training. What happens is when we're in the normal chaos of travel and meeting our customers, we kind of forget this and it gets in the back burner. I think this is a phenomenal time to focus on yourself. On the lower right, I like this little quote from Zig Ziglar is, don't count the things you do. Kind of what we're doing now is do the things that count. I think right now to better ourselves, our skill sets, I think we're seeing a lot of different training platforms surface internally and externally. I would do things that are really important to you in the field that you practice in. I think board certification is a great concept. A lot of CE courses, finding myself a lot more in Kindle now. But the trap, though, is because it's not the same, we can get into this email trap, we can get into the busy trap, we can get into the numbers trap. And I think people are really, within our own organization, and I think in others, are redefining what those metrics should look like, and as they should. And I'm glad this was brought up earlier today. My last slide is the next one. And there's a couple of things that are today, there's two predominant things that are really contagious, and that's not only viruses, but emotions. Colin Powell, one of my favorite quotes of his was that optimism is a force multiplier. And sorry about that background noise. This is a really good resource. Joshua Friedman, he's the CEO of 6 Seconds, and there's other websites out there around emotional intelligence or emotional quotient or EQ, which is shown here at the top of the slide. But this is a really good time to be really respectful of our thought leaders. I think giving our thought leaders some space, I think providing them an awareness that we're there for support. But as you shown in your survey and best practices, Dr. Massey, and we're seeing it now, we're collecting information internally. Our providers just don't want to get on a Zoom right now. And I think being present is important, and giving our customers space and giving them the ability to contact us when needed. I think we need a little bit more time before we start to engage in data discussion. I think right now it's important to say, hey, is there anything I can do for you? Is there anything that we can do for you as a company? Something that we are also doing. But I would say that right now, trying to, this is a great website, by the way. If you go to Google and type in 6 seconds, 14 resources for emotional health during coronavirus times, it's a really good review. There's lots of video on this website that I think is useful. I think this is a good time. If you've not taken any classes or books or read on EQ, this is a good time to, I think, buffer up and be more knowledgeable about this. And I think it's really helpful for us as field medical professionals to have the sort of the EQ aspect of our jobs and to better understand the stress. And I thought I heard it in Dr. Girgis's voice, actually. He's probably, I know he's under a lot of stress, and we're under stress too, in that our jobs are completely did a 180 on us. But I think we can be I know we can be a valuable resource. I think we need to be more comfortable now focusing on, as you said earlier, Dr. Massey, and that is putting the mask on first. I think we can just be better at doing more training internally, looking at resources that are, improve our skill set. And we can focus on our customers, but I think slowly. And I think letting them know that you're there is important. And then let them, I think, guide sort of the rate in which you want to re-enter those scientific discussions. Because there's so much chaos and things are changing, I think it's good to be really, really aware of sort of what our providers are going through at this point. I think, some of our providers have smaller practices that are closed. Some of our providers are in big systems that are doing full telemedicine. I think if you're in the telemedicine industry now, boy, this is job security, right? You can help so many people at this point. But it's very heterogeneous what I'm hearing on what providers are going through with full telemedicine, operating essential only visits in clinics, to some of these smaller clinics not being able to, of course, not have any staff, and really changing how they're doing things. So I wanted to give you a broader perspective. Zoom is here. I did a practice session with somebody who was, I would say, video phobic yesterday. We kind of broke the ice with Zoom, and I think she at the end, she was a lot more comfortable with it. Practice session today with another provider. I know we're reaching out and saying, hey, if you want to get together on Zoom, let's do it. You saw that best practice survey. This may not be the best time this week, but things will evolve. And that's my personal experience right now. You see this lighthouse on the lower part of this, and that is, that to me is like, what's your foundation? We talked about trust. integrity. We're all work for a company that we care about, and we're doing things that impact patient care, and that should be our foundation. And we got to think of ways that we can be a resource, and we will be. But I think we just need to alter the pace of what we're doing this. I'm really glad, Dr. Soliman, you've got this task force. I think there's so much information out there. With our family and friends, and they know that you're all in healthcare, I feel like we're playing Dr. Phil half the time with these individuals, because they don't have the filter that you do. And I think being a lighthouse in this era right now, in this crisis, I think will get us very far.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. Thank you so much, Dr. Fell. That was great. Again, as always, you provide a lot of great insight. Thanks again to Dr. Massey and Dr. Girgis as well for taking the time. A lot of great insights, a lot of great concepts that hopefully our attendees will be able to apply to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis in the industry and what they need to think about when they're dealing with healthcare providers. I know we're over the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Adam Bianchi, Brand Director with the ACMA.
Thanks, Dr. Soliman. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Again, please get involved in whatever way you can, whether it's through the ACMA's programs or in your local community. We want everyone to be as safe as possible during this unprecedented time. Together, we can be part of the solution. We'll meet here again on April 23rd for the next ACMA webinar, and I hope that everyone can join us then. Thank you for your time today. Everyone, be safe.